The Equator Emerald. This is Indonesia. Multicultural country. Abundant in natural resources. This is a blessing. Natural heritage that must be managed wisely, producing an abundance of sustainable natural wealth, present and future, for us. This rich nature is for us, a bountiful blessing. From Indonesia, this is the International Conference on Sustainable Tropical Land Management.
The Honorable Dr. Syahrul Yassin Limpo, SH MSc MH, Minister of Agriculture, Republic of Indonesia. Dr. Fajri Jufri, the Director General of Indonesian Agency for Agricultural Research and Development, Professor Budi Mulyanto, Chairman of the Indonesian Soil Science Association, Professor Takashi Kosaki, President of International Union of Soil Sciences, all Director of Research Center under the Indonesian Agency for Agricultural Research and Development, the Research Director PT Pupuk Indonesia, invited speakers, all participants from universities and other institutions, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be on you. Good morning and best wishes for all of us, and good afternoon, good evening to all participants from the outside of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first International Conference on Sustainable Tropical Land Management, which is virtually held on September 16 to September 18, 2020. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Grace Kirana, as the Master of Ceremony in this conference. On behalf of the committee, I would like to express our warm welcome and great appreciation to all of you to attending the conference. Before the start the conference, it's my deep pleasure to please Dr. Fajri Jufri, the Director General of Indonesian Agency for Agricultural Research and Development, to deliver his welcome speech. Dr. Fajri Jufri, the time is yours.
The Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Republic of Indonesia, President of the International Soil Science Association, Professor Dr. Takashi Kosaki, Chairman of Indonesian Soil Science Association, Professor Dr. Budi Mulyanto, invite speaker, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and best wishes for all us. Let us express our praise and gratitude to Allah of the Almighty for His grace and guidance so that we can attend the opening ceremony of the International Conference on Sustainable Tropical Land Management with the theme Adapting Land Management to Climate Change and Combating Land Degradation to Increase the Resilience of Agricultural System. I am from the Indonesian Agriculture Research and Development Agency. Would like to welcome you all to this conference. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, agriculture sector as the main driver of economic development in the tropical countries faces a big challenge to feed 40% of the world population. In the Indonesian agriculture sector is the safeguard in meeting the food needs and Indonesian 267 million people. Land in the tropics in general is used the all year round for intensive cultivation due to high population density with intensive land use. Tropical agriculture, which has high rainfall and high temperature, is very susceptible to land degradation. On the other hand, tropical regions have also experienced negative impact of climate change. Harvest failure can occur due to the lack of ability and knowledge of agriculture actors to carry out adaptation action, and hence this can threaten food security not only at the national level but also the regional level. To solve the problem, we need to appropriate technology innovation. There's a need to develop a platform is with research finding can be conveyed to agriculture practitioners. On the other hand, research feedback from farmers on the challenge of technology implementation. Furthermore, appropriate technology need to be communicated to decision maker to effectively expand implementation to area with common recommendation domain. Therefore, this conference is the means of communication and dissemination among research practitioners and policymakers so that result can influence land management, especially in the tropic. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, from this conference series, I hope that implementable idea, science and technology can be communicated, especially on adapted land management to climate change and combating land degradation. From this conference that will be held from today until 18 September 2020, I hope that various research results that they contribute to science will be displayed and soon can be published in journal and scientific proceeding. It's also my hope that this seminar will provide direction for sustainable tropical land management to maximize its economic benefit and minimize its environmental impact. That's all I want to say this morning. Thanks for joining the international conference today. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Fajri, for the welcome speech. Ladies and gentlemen, and all distinguished guests, again, this is my deep pleasure as now I would like to please Minister of Agriculture of the Republic of Indonesia to deliver his welcome remark. Dr. Syahrul Yassin Limpo, SH, MSI, MH, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Yang saya hormati Presiden Himpunan Ilmu Tani Internasional, Profesor Dr. Takashi Koshaki, dan yang sama saya hormati Ketua Himpunan Ilmu Tani Indonesia, Profesor Dr. Budi Mulyanto, para pejabat struktural, Profesor riset, peneliti, rekayasa, penyuluh lingkup Badan Litbang Pertanian Republik Indonesia, para peserta, pembicara, dan tamu undangan sekalian yang sama saya muliakan. Hamdan wa syukran lillah wala haula wala quwwata illa billah. Pertama-tama, mari kita panjatkan puji dan syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa taala Karena atas berkat rahmat dan hidayahnya, hari ini kita bisa menghadiri acara seminar internasional pengelolaan lahan tropis yang berkelanjutan tahun 2020. Tema seminar internasional yang baru pertama kali diadakan ini adalah pengelolaan lahan adaptif terhadap perubahan iklim dan penanganan degradasi lahan untuk meningkatkan ketangguhan sistem pertanian. Saudara-saudara sekalian yang berbahagia, seperti yang kita rasakan bersama bahwa pandemi COVID-19 telah berdampak negatif secara global. Prediksi pertumbuhan ekonomi negara-negara di seluruh dunia telah terkoreksi secara signifikan. Bahkan banyak negara telah masuk ke jurang resesi yang dalam, termasuk beberapa negara tetangga kita. Di Indonesia, perekonomian secara umum telah melemah, meski belum masuk ke jurang resesi. Hampir semua sektor mengalami pelemahan, bahkan tumbuh negatif, kecuali sektor pertanian. Alhamdulillah, sebagai insan pertanian Indonesia yang kita patut bersyukur bahwa sektor pertanian menunjukkan ketangguhan dalam situasi COVID-19 ini. Badan Pusat Statistik atau BPS melaporkan bahwa pada triwulan 2 2020, sektor pertanian mampu mencatat pertumbuhan PDB positif sebesar 16,24%. Pada triwulan yang sama, struktur pertumbuhan PDB nasional menurut lapangan usaha sektor pertanian mencatat pertumbuhan positif sebesar 2,19%. Bahkan dalam rangka mewujudkan kedaulatan pangan kita, utamanya di era pandemi COVID-19 ini, kita mampu mengembangkan food estate di Kalimantan Tengah, dan insya Allah beberapa daerah lainnya akan kita intervensi dengan food estate. Saudara-saudara sekalian yang berbahagia, tantangan besar lainnya adalah perubahan iklim yang dampaknya telah dirasakan oleh sektor pertanian kita. Perubahan iklim telah meningkatkan ketidakpastian prediksi iklim dan curah hujan. Peningkatan intensitas hujan terkait erat dengan munculnya kondisi iklim ekstrim seperti angin dan badai. Meningkatkan permukaan air laut telah menyebabkan risiko salinitas tanah menjadi meningkat. Beberapa daerah melaporkan peningkatan banjir rob dan penyempitan garis pantai telah ada di semua tempat. Secara tidak langsung perubahan iklim ini juga telah meningkatkan kualitas dan kuantitas serangan organisme pengganggu tanaman. Indonesia sebagai negara tropis yang wilayahnya sebagian besar berombak hingga bergunung juga mengalami laju degradasi lahan yang lebih cepat dibandingkan negara non-tropis lainnya. Curah hujan dan suhu yang tinggi telah menyebabkan proses erosi, dekomposisi, melapuhkan, dan pemasaman berjalan secara cepat. Bahkan penggunaan pupuk anorganik secara masif dan intensif secara revolusi hijau ternyata bukan tidak tindakan solutif. Kadang bahkan organik di dalam tanah cepat terkuras, menyebabkan tanah menjadi keras, akar sulit bernapas, biji sulit menjadi bernas, dan saya kira ini menjadi bagian-bagian dari tantangan-tantangan baru di era after COVID yang ada ini. Meskipun demikian, sektor pertanian memiliki potensi sangat besar untuk berkontribusi dalam aksi perubahan iklim melalui kegiatan adaptation, go, benefit, dan resiliensi yang sedang kita perjuangkan bersama dalam forum global UNFCCC melalui gugus tugas Chronovia Joint Work on Agriculture. Saudara-saudara sekalian yang saya hormati, tantangan pembangunan pertanian seperti yang diuraikan di atas akan mampu kita atasi secara baik apabila kita bekerja secara bersama-sama dengan penuh fokus dan serius. Saya berharap agar acara ini dapat merumuskan poin-poin penting untuk memberi nilai tambah bagi kebijakan pembangunan pertanian Indonesia, terutama dalam mengatasi degradasi lahan dan dampak perubahan iklim melalui pengelolaan lahan pertanian yang berkelanjutan dan ramah lingkungan. Saudara-saudara sekalian yang sama saya hormati, peserta seminar yang sama saya muliakan. Terima kasih telah menyelenggarakan seminar internasional ini. Sebagai implementasi kerja keras dalam membangun pertanian daerah tropis pada umumnya dan pertanian Indonesia pada khususnya dalam upaya mencapai ketahanan pangan nasional yang berkelanjutan dan tentu ramah lingkungan. Terima kasih atas kontribusi para pakar dari dalam dan luar negeri mensukseskan seminar internasional ini. Dan saya atas nama negara, atas nama pemerintah, atas nama Menteri Pertanian, dengan ini mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Seminar Internasional Pengelolaan Lahan Tropis yang berkelanjutan 2020 secara resmi saya nyatakan dibuka. Selamat berseminar, kita pastikan negeri ini merdeka pangan. Ridha Allah bersama kita, pertanian pasti makin maju, makin mandiri, dan makin modern di tangan kita semua. Sekian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Menteri Pertanian Republik Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for the welcome remark. Ladies and gentlemen, we are highly appreciate your presence to attend this international virtual conference. Even though we are miles apart one another, let us welcome you all to watch this welcome dance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Rebong Dance. Thank you for watching welcome dance called Rebong Dance, performed by two beautiful Balinese dancers. They are Niputu Ananda Karista Iswari and Putu Elisa from Sari Kusuma House of Dancers Indonesia. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Now we are come to our main program, its plenary session. But before we start our first plenary session, let me inform you that today we will have also parallel session after the plenary session 1. We will also have plenary session 2 in the end of today's agenda. In this plenary session, we have Professor Takashi Kosaki, President of International Union of Soil Sciences, and as the keynote speaker, and Professor Fahmuddin Agus from Indonesian Center for Agricultural Land Resources, Research and Development as the moderator. Let's start the plenary session 1, and we have 45 minutes for plenary session. Professor Fahmuddin Agus, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. We are very fortunate to have with us Professor Takashi Kosaki. He is the president of the International Union of Soil Sciences, and he's also the professor of the Faculty of the International Communication at Aichi University in Nagoya, Japan. The title of his speech for this morning or this afternoon, whatever, is about the soil education for sustainable development of our society. Professor Takashi, please, the time is yours.
Honorary guests, distinguished professors, scientists, scholars, and ladies and gentlemen, Selamat pagi. This is the one that I still remember as a Bahasa Indonesia. Good morning. On behalf of the International Unions of Soil Sciences, I would like to extend my heartiest congratulations on the first International Conference on Sustainable Tropical Land Management to all members of the Indonesian Soil Science Society. I am very much honored and privileged to be invited in this important conference. I thank all members of the society, as well as the organizing committee of the conference, together with the members of Indonesian Center for Agricultural Land Resource Research and Development, and the varieties of sponsors for making such a wonderful gathering planned and realized, and adding a new and commemorable page in the history. I also express my sincere gratitude for your dedication to and continuous and consistent support to the International Union of Soil Sciences, as well as the East and Southeast Asian Federations of Soil Science Societies, IUSS, as a national member. I am very pleased also to mention that IUSS is getting well known as Asian regional body, closely working together with the IUSS, like the European Confederation of Soil Science Societies, the Latin American Society of Soil Science, the African Society of Soil Science, etc., etc. As you know, the IUSS is now pushing forward the International Decade of Soils project. Many of our divisions and commissions and working groups are organizing varieties of forums to promote and activate our basic researches, to innovate technologies, to expand public awareness of soil sciences. The central theme of your conference, Adapting Land Management to Climate Change and Combating Land Degradation to Increase Resilience of Agricultural System, just fits into the scope of our International Decade of Soils, and thus we are very happy to share your advances in soil sciences and related field research, which will be presented in the conference with all members of the international unions of soil sciences in the world. The topic that I would like to talk this morning is, as you can see here, the soil education for sustainable development of our society, which is a bit different from the one on the program. I am very sorry for inconvenience, but please allow me to send our quite important message from the IUSS, which is of course very closely relevant to the agenda of this conference as well. Thank you very much for your understanding in advance. Sustainable Development Goals, as you know very well, were born at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro in 2012 to produce a set of universal goals that meet the urgent environmental, political, and economic challenges facing our world. There are 17 goals, starting from no poverty to partnership for the goals 17. But maybe the number 15, life on land, is the closest of our concerns. But soil scientists can contribute not only this, but no poverty, or the zero hunger, or the good health and well-being, and the climate change. Those are very much closely related to soil science. And then gender problems or water problems or aquatic systems, those are also next to those four goals. It will come. And finally, the other the goals are also very much related to the activities of the soil sciences. But we have to know that 50% to 52% of the land used for agriculture is moderately or severely affected by soil degradation. And land degradation affected 1.5 billion people globally. And due to drought and desertification, 12 million hectares per year, that is 23 hectares per minute, are getting lost very quickly. And 74% of the poor are directly affected by land degradation. It is obvious that sustainable land management is necessary. But does everybody knows about this? We need more public awareness. As you know, we celebrated and we did a lot in the year 2015 because that was the International Year of Soils. So the IUSS believes that it is incumbent on IUSS members to not only maintain the levels of activities generated in the International Year of Soils 2015, but to increase the momentum and extent of our contributions on the soils issue as we move towards the centenary of the International Union of Soil Sciences formation in 2024. That is our new project, International Decade of Soils. We are currently doing, or we will do, for the International Decade of Soils. It includes the dissemination of information. Well, this is really the most important thing that we have to do as international organizations. And we are publishing a series of books. And we are distributing the information about the very prestigious and the big soil scientists, what they have done, and how it will become the basis of our current research. And we are trying to expand our outreach as well, not only within the community of soil science, but around the soil science field, or the international organizations such as IAEA or CGIAR, UNEP, World Bank, World Wildlife Foundation, whatsoever. We are expanding our activity, let them know what we are doing. And one of the most important topic that we are pushing forward is the education, soil education. So some children's books, we are trying to prepare with a set of standard contents with different languages and web-based materials, etc. That's what we are now trying to do. Why children? Why children? We did the questions to our society in my country, Japan. We made a question like, do you like to know about soils? To the children, school children, from the 1st grade to the 6th grade. That is 6 years old to 12 years old. The people who wants to know as much as possible about soils is getting like this. When they were in a 1st grade, 2nd grade, well, they are very much interested in soils, but 4, 5, 6, the grade, the interest is getting declined. But the only 5th grade, well, the interest is getting become better than the other side. Why it happen? That's very quite strange things we found. And we studied the keywords appeared in the guidelines from the Ministry of Education. If you look, starting from the 1947, this is just after the World War II, till the 2008, the keyword soils was very much in 1947, 50, 60, 70 years ago. But nowadays is only one, decreased very much like this. What is the current the guideline on soils for grade 5? That's the 5th years in the elementary schools. The life on land, they learn, number 1, germination, growth, and fruiting. The point is the plants germinate using nutrients in their seeds. Okay, the plants need the sun and the fertilizer when they germinate. See, germination is affected by moisture, air, and temperature. Plant growth is affected by sunlight and fertilizer. Pollination results in fruiting. Oops. No soil. All right. In this item, no soil appears. Problems. The second, the item is runoff water. Then we can see runoff water erodes land and transports stones and soil. Okay. Here, the term soil appears in guidelines. Another one, the stone in upper streams are different in shapes and size from those in lower streams. Rain intensity determines the speed and the amount of flowing water. Only one soil here in the 5th grade. Okay, but even one, it helps a lot because the 5th grade, the interest increases very sharply and decline very sharply again in the 6th grade. That's unfortunate. But anyway, the 5th, because they learn about the soil with just one word, but their interest increased so quickly like this. It's really interesting, isn't it? So we concluded the good start is, or efficient target of soil education is small children, okay? Pre or elementary school, the lower half of the elementary school children, they are the good target to let them know, because they will grow up and they will start family, they will teach their own children and such and such. So we have to get started from the small children. We are doing quite a lot of soil education program, soil and the environmental education program for school kids and their parents together, and all ordinary people. Mostly jointly with the national, regional societies, museums of the national history, or university people, or agriculture research centers, or agricultural schools, or even the private companies. We are working together. The first step is taking the children out of the doors and let them have the observation of soil profiles and making miniatures of monoliths. Okay, and they come into the lab and they do some experiments. Okay, to watch the water movement or to observe with the microscopes the small animals, whatever, and even their parents, mainly the mothers, are doing some work for dyeing the clothes with soils. It's, we can do something like this sort of things. And we can do workshop as well. One of the most important and most interesting to those children and peoples are the shiny soil balls. This is very shiny balls made of soil. Okay, well, that's very simple. To dry the soil and to break the soil into fine, powders, and they add water and knead. Then they prepare a sphere and dry a bit and polish. Even a small, the kids can polish with spoons. Maybe 10 minutes or 30 minutes. Of course, 2 hours, 3 hours is much better, but they are not very much tolerant to polish such a long time. But even a short, the period like 5 minutes, well, it can become quite shiny. That's really a good, practice to get a very fancy sort of things from soil. And of course, it depends on the quality of soil. A very good ball or looks quite poor, not shiny ball. It depends on the quality of the soils. Okay. Or we can see the mobile soil museum. You don't have to go to the soil museum. Soil museum will come to you, come to your, the town, come to your city in a truck. They carry a soil monoliths, and they carry something like miniatures or of the soil, animals and such, and they can learn what is soil, how the soil function, like this. And of course, many of us prepared and published textbooks for children and students and teachers. But starting from the introductory topics for elementary school children, the first thing is let's sniff soil smell, or what color here, we can check. This is the most, but even, let them understand the soil absorptivity. They we can do a quite simple experiment in the lab. And so we put the ink in the soil, and the leaked water or ink lose the ink color. This is due to the soil absorptivity, right? Such a experiment. Or middle level topics for high school students, for instance, soil biology. Well, the hand sorting is the first step, but they can do something like, turbine funnel procedures. This is quite simple and cheap. We can do it. So the contents are very unique and diverse. But that is all area specific, or nation specific, or regional specific. So it's quite difficult to approach the policymakers to develop the soil education. It's quite different, in each country. It's a big, big headache for them. So we need alliance, okay, with simple and standardized protocols in soil education to approach the policymakers for their better understanding soils matter. So if we do have such tools, we can talk to them and let them move, because this is the world standard. Why not do with us in my country? They are doing, the other people are doing, why not we are doing here in my country? So that's much easier if we have such systems. Now the IUSS is planning to publish a book. The title is the Soil Science Education, Global Concepts and Teaching. Okay, it's coming very soon, in 1 month, or maybe at most 2 months' time, it will come. Now the final proofreading stages. Our objective is to provide leaders. The leaders are mainly engaged in teaching soils, geosciences, environment, ecosystem, etc. In the schools or working at museums, serving at education and extension organizations such as NPO, NGO, with basic framework of soil and soil sciences, and the collection of good practices currently employed, so that the readers could learn and share with whatever suited their own conditions effectively. That is the objectives of this, the book publications. The book contains 3 parts, 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 is dedicated to the framework of soil science education. It's a general, framework. So how do we build up the curriculum? Or what is the philosophy or concept when you give the teaching to the people from the preschool children to the university, or even the adult peoples. Okay, chapter 1 is something like a framing soil science education. Okay, in the chapter 2 is a tenets in soil science education. That is the how to allocate the topic into the K-12 curricula in the US. And number 3 is the more concrete ideas, the guidelines for introducing the essence of soil science in pre and primary school. And chapter 4 is the guidelines for under and the postgraduate students in the university. And finally, how to educate the ordinary people, adult people. That's sort of, the framework or outline or philosophy. That sort of things are described in part 1. And part 2 is the good practices in social science education. We collected an example, many examples from different countries, what they have done and what they found as quite effective, efficient tools for social education. That is what we call a good practices. The one from, we are very sorry, but we got only one from Africa to Burkina Faso. And we would like to show 3 from Asia, like India, Japan, and Taiwan. Unfortunately, we invited the Indonesian Society also, but unfortunately, we were not able to have their contribution. But maybe next time, yes, we are waiting for your contribution to our publication as well. Okay. Then from Europe, yes, they contributed from Austria and Russia and Spain. Those are the examples from European countries. And from North and South America, contribution from Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, and Mexico, Peru, and Venezuela. Well, this time quite a lot of Latin American countries are contributing their experiences to our publications. And finally, the contribution from Oceania, that's Australia and New Zealand. Okay. Well, those the good practices, of course, includes different levels, starting from pre and elementary school, or high school, or university students and adults. So you can choose, whatever you are interested in, and find out what they are doing. And if you find that is very interesting, and that we can do it in my country as well, or we are doing the same things. Okay, let's join together, or something like this. So you can get some ideas and share ideas about the topics that is collected and published in the book. And finally, the part 3 is dedicated for the future, based on the available information, the currently practiced, and the ideas for the futures as a framework or philosophy. Then we would like to propose what is necessary, what is the current problem, how to solve the problem, and how to prepare the much better versions of the soil education curriculum. That they have done very much. The Professor Damien Field and other people are the chairs and the vice chairs of the divisions and the commissions and the working groups of the International Unions of Soil Sciences. So this is really the products of all IUSS people who are very much working for soil sciences educations. So this is really a good outcomes from the unions. So then, okay, after in the publishing the book, what we are going to do? This is not good to just publish the book and ask all of you, please purchase. And spend money to IUSS. It's no good. It's no good. We know that. So the IUSS is now planning to distribute the book to varieties of societies, national societies, and some others, regional societies, so that the current contents and the methods and the systems of soil and soil science education be criticized, evaluate, and how to improve for the future. Because we would like to promote and enhance the research, education, and the public awareness about soils. So we have to use this book, okay? So yes, but we have quite limited funding conditions. So I cannot, distribute this book to all members of the, our unions. But we are planning to at least 1 or 2 books to each national societies. For instance, okay, we'd like to present the book to the president or secretary, I don't know, but for Indonesian soil science societies. So the US society, please use that 1 or 2 copies, but to let all members of the society knows about this and share the information and develop your own program for soil education. This is just a seed, The book is just a seed. Of course, we hope as many as members can purchase this book. It will cost maybe the 30 euros or less, or something like this. Because not very much cheap, but not very much expensive. So when it comes out, please think about this book as well. It's very important, a very good start for soil education, or to evaluate your own education system to improve for the future. Okay. So it's really what we need is a collaboration. Okay. So we always together with you. So let's go and step forward with the IUSS for establishing a sustainable societies. We really need a collaboration. We really need a enhancement of the collaboration. It will make empowerment of the scientists, workers, not only those, but the people in the country to conserve and improve the soil's quality. That's what we are expecting, and for what that we have to work much harder than the present for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Takashi Kosaki, for the very inspiring presentation. Professor Kosaki has emphasized how important soil education is, and the education about the soil should be started from kindergarten, from childhood to adult level, not only in the formal education, but also in the informal education, like in the museum. He also has tell us the challenge of how to convince the policymakers about the importance of the soil. So if we can educate the young generation about the soil, hopefully the future leader will understand better how important soil is for the livelihood of the society. And Professor Kosaki has also informed us that soon there will be a book to be published by the International Union of Soil Sciences on the soil education, global concepts, and teaching. And he mentioned to us that Indonesia will certainly have one copy, but we also hope that we can have the electronic copies. And once again, thank you very much, Professor Kosaki, and I hand over the program to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Takashi, for the presentation, and thank you, Professor Fahmuddin, for moderating the session. Now we come to plenary session 2, and we have Professor Budiman Minasni from the University of Sydney, Australia, Dr. Jan Verhagen from Wageningen University and Research, Netherlands, Dr. Cornelia Rumpel from France, French National Center for Scientific Research, and will be moderated by Professor Budi Mulyanto, the Chairman of Indonesian Soil Science Society. We will have this session from now up to 4 o'clock. Professor Budi Mulyanto, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody in this session. It's quite honor for me to moderate the very precious session in the conference, International Conference on Sustainable Tropical Land Management. In this plenary session will be speaker Professor Budiman Minasni. Professor Budiman Minasni of University of Sydney, Australia. He will speak about carbon dynamic of tropical soil and their implication to sustainable agriculture. And then the second speaker is Dr. Jan Verhagen, the Wageningen University and Research, the Netherlands. He will speak about management for adaptation and mitigation of climate change. And then the third it is Dr. Cornelia Rumpel of French National Center for Scientific Research, the French. He will speak about the what P. I don't know what does it mean. The P, it is party. For 1,000 initiative as multi-stakeholder platform to achieve the organic carbon sequestration in tropical soil through sustainable practices. And we have every speaker 30 minutes and will follow by discussion every speaker 15 minutes. And I will let the first speaker, Dr. Professor Budiman Minasni. Then before his presentation, I would like to read his biodata. Budiman Minasni is a professor in the soil landscape modeling and at the University of Sydney. Professor Minasni is a globally recognized authority in the digital soil mapping and modeling, whose primary contribute to the discipline of soil science have been to understand why soil vary so greatly, to enable better management and how soil has changed due to human activity, to enable soil health diagnosis. His research and vision are essentially to managing climate change, food, water, and energy security. Soil information is greatly valuable, and his research has created a new standard on the cost-effective delivery of accurate and precise information on soil asset from the scale of the global right down to the paddock. His work is consistently funded by highly esteemed grants, with more than 160 publications. He was recognized as highly cited research in 2019 and awarded the G.K. Taylor Gold Medal by the Australian Society of Soil Science for the most meritorious publication. And now I will let the time for Professor Budiman Minasti. The time is yours, Pak Budiman, please. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. You
Okay,
have
so
30 minutes lecture, Pak, please.
Thank you. So now I'm allowed to speak now before they mute me, so I cannot speak.
Okay. The same with me before. Please,
Thank you,
Pak.
Pak. Yeah. Thank you, Pak Budi Mulyanto, for your nice introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the organizer for inviting me to speak to you. So although I'm in Indonesia, I can speak to you all. Selamat siang, Bapak-bapak dan Ibu-ibu. Senang bertemu kembali. So I will share with you my screen. So although we cannot travel, we can meet in a virtual world. So
Yes.
Nice to meet you all.
Great
So I'm going to talk about soil carbon in the tropics, and a special reference to Indonesia based on some works I did with colleagues in Indonesia. And I want to acknowledge my co-author, Professor Dian Fiantis, who has also contributed to some of the topic that's going to be presented today. So nowadays, people talks a lot about soil carbon. So soil carbon is not just an indicator of soil fertility. So when we talk about soil carbon, we talk about soil fertility, soil physical fertility, soil biological fertility. But nowadays also we say that soil carbon is a currency of carbon is also a currency for climate change, because the emission of carbon in the atmosphere has increased a lot. So can soil offer a solution to of this carbon? Can soil be a solution to the climate in the carbon? So if we look at the distribution of the soil carbon in the world, we can see that it varies a lot. So this is a map of the soil carbon concentration of the world. Soil carbon stock. So the blue one, it means that it's quite high, and the red means it's quite low, right? So obviously, in an area under the cold climate, we can see there's a lot of accumulation of carbon because of the cold temperature. But in the tropics, where we are talking about now, which is the theme of this presentation, we can also see it varies a lot. So it varies in the area of the desert, where arid area where there's a very low carbon content, especially in the area of the desert area in Australia. But in the humid tropics, if you see, for example, Indonesia, so although it's in the tropics, although it's quite high temperature, you can see there's a small increase in the carbon, and all the carbon, the carbon content is relatively high because of the high precipitation, high precipitation, which gives us a high biomass and eventually high soil carbon. So it has a in the humid tropics region, it has a very high carbon level, high organic matter level, and also it depends on the type of soils that we are looking at, because not all soils are the same, and especially in the tropics, there are different types of soil. So soils that come from volcanic ash that you call antisoils is generally the highest carbon content that can be found in Indonesia and probably all over the world. So the average can be 1.5, but the average sometimes it can be 2 to 5%. That's common. And then followed by alphisols, insectisols, ultisols, and antisols. And also, it also depends on the depth as well. So most of it, it's the distribution is following exponential. It's quite high on the soil surface, and then it decreases with depth. So this figure is from 1955, so not that long ago. So the Dutch researcher, when they are looking at soil organic matter, and if you see that the name that they give is kadar bunga tanah, that means the organic matter, is the flower of the soil, the organic matter of the soil. So it has a very so the black soil that he said that under the forest, it's about 30% organic matter or about 15% carbon, so which is quite high compared, and also it depends on the soil type. So it's not just depends on the soil type, but it also strongly depends on the land use. So this is some data we have on Indonesia. So obviously organic carbon content in a forest is the highest level, followed by plantations, paddy field, sometimes it's grassland, and the lowest you can find in the cropping area or sometimes in the urban area. So in addition to the soil type, it also depends on the land use, but also it depends on the history of the land use. So what I'm going to do now is just going to give you some idea about how we quantify it. So this is the data from Australia. I know that this is not tropics, but it happens all over the world. And what from the survey that we did a few years ago on a lot of the farms in the eastern part of Australia, we see that we also register years since the beginning of the cultivations, how many years since the land, the soil has been converted from natural vegetation to croplands. And we can see the general trend is that if the soil is still under the natural vegetation can be a forest, it can be grassland and other things, the carbon content is relatively high, from 1 to 3%, average of 1.5%. But with increasing times of cultivation, you can see that the carbon content drops over time, right? So after 10 years, usually you got half of the carbon content what you begin with. So you can normalize that if we say that this is the beginning of time, or the soil carbon in the reference, soil carbon in the natural vegetation as the reference soil organic carbon. So this is the maximum or potentially the highest that you can achieve within the soil under the native vegetation before conversion. And we, if we reference this as our carbon reference level, and then we plot the carbon content and we divide the value of the carbon content over the reference value, and we got what we call as a carbon over carbon reference value. This represents fraction loss of soil organic carbon over the reference soil organic carbon content. So we can see that initially under the native vegetation, before clearing, we have a value of 1. So after 10 years, our carbon content decreased around 55%, and after 20 years, it decreased to 50%. So this gives us as a reference to how many percent of carbon content we have lost from the soil, and it also gives us an opportunity also to regain that loss so that we don't lose further. So how can we, what effort can we do in order to get back this loss into positive? And we can look at this carbon content over the reference carbon contents, this fraction, as equivalent to the IPCC emission factors. So if you're working with a greenhouse gas emission calculation for IPCC, they want to know how much soil carbon has been lost. So they calculate it based on the reference carbon content, and they multiply by the factor, what they call as the emission factor. So what type of land use you put in, what type of management, and how much input. So all of this we can summarize or similar to the emission factor, or this C over reference state, right? So for example, in this case, I've used this soil for 15 years. So my value is already 50%. My carbon value is 50% of the original state. So that means I'm emitting lots of carbon in the atmosphere. So this is a primary loss loss of soil organic carbon is due to land use change, right? So one of the main research that people do, it's not just in Indonesia, but it's all over the world, is that they compare the carbon content under a plantation and under natural forest. You see, for example, in the oil palm in Jambi, so after how many years, several years of opening, then you lost about 50%. Some of the area you got lost about 50% of the original carbon, not just only from the surface of the soil, but also up to 80 centimeter on the soil. Similarly, in different parts of the world, so you have a loss of organic carbon. So this is an analysis done by Axel Dorn in Germany. So they look at areas in the tropics and what type of land use change which decreases the soil organic carbon. That means the carbon over the reference carbon is less than 1. That means the one that has lost, this one has lost 10%, this one has lost 20%, and so on. So if it's a primary forest to grassland, you expect to lose about 10% of carbon. So this is at a different depth. And if it's a primary forest to cropland, you lose about 30% of carbon. And in the perennial, it depends, 20 to 30%. So most of it, what is saying that if you convert from forest, either primary forest to cropland, you're going to lose a fraction of the carbon, right? And this loss is also decreased depending on time. What it means that if the age of the cropping, with increasing age of cropping, then your carbon level in the soil will be decreasing with time. So if it's less than 4 years old, you'll probably lose only about 10%. But with over time, with 10 or 20 years, you'll lose about 30 to 40%. So this is another data from Axel Dorn. So if we look at all different studies, so this is all different studies in the tropics that studies the conversion from forests in the tropics to croplands or plantations. So usually after 20 years of cultivation, on average 20 years of cultivation, you lose 30%, or on average the carbon over the reference carbon is 0.7. That means that you lose 30% of the soil carbon in the soil, which is similar to most finding, and this happens as well. It's not just in the tropics, also happens in the temperate area. And so, but in some cases, the topsoil organic carbon, if you keep continuing use the soil with very little amount of input. This is an example from my colleague in North Sumatra, in Delhi, North Sumatra. They have monitored the soil carbon level on the soil surface because it's continually being used for tobacco, sugarcane, tobacco 1 year, 4 year sugarcane. And you can see that over time, this is since 1970s, that 1.5 values is now decreased to around 0.6, which is quite a lot. And what is the consequence of this decrease? If you see that this is the yield in terms of tons, kilograms per hectare, you can see that it also has decreased substantially from the optimal value around 1,000 or 1 ton per hectare. Now it's around only 0.25 of a ton per hectare. So it's quite significant. So the decrease in organic carbon can result in a decrease in the carbon content. So this is if we plot this data, on this graph again. So this is in North Sumatra, that under certain condition, under chronic condition, chronic soil organic carbon deficiency, over time, over 20 years, over 40 years, your soil carbon can only remain 20% of its original value, which is quite low. And the resulting of that is that you're going to lose, you're not just going to, the soil is not just going to lose its fertility, but it's going to affect the productivity of the plant. So how to reverse this decline? Is it possible to reverse this decline? So what's the literature says? So this is the land use change which increase the soil organic carbon, or the carbon over the reference carbon is greater than 1. So one of it is to convert to convert the grassland into forest, or convert the forest into cropland. Right? So converting the forest into grassland, or converting grassland or cropland into forest, which is you get an increase in the soil carbon, which is fine. But then what happened to the cropland? What are people going to produce, or what does farmer need to? They cannot eat from a forest. You cannot ask the farmer to convert everything to a cropland or to a grassland, right? So this is not possible. And another one is that you convert the cropland to grassland. You probably can with some animals, but that's also not feasible for most area in the tropics. And also the cropland to the fallow. And that means that you have to leave your soil for the recover for some time. So this is what happening in fallow, which has to been done. It's in the terms of a shifting cultivation. So this is a simulation that people use the soil for 3 or 4 years and then let it recover for another 5 years and then do it back again. So if you look at what's happening to the carbon content, it actually, over time, it always have to decrease because there's not enough input, because you keep using the soil, if there's not enough input, but the decrease is relatively small. The decrease is only over 60 or 70 years, you only decrease of about 20%, which is over time is not that great. But if under continuous cropping, your decrease can be up to 20%, right? So what can we do to reverse this change? So we need to have some change in practice that you need to have a good management, that this allows for this putting back the carbon in the soil, so that so that the carbon is obviously just an input and output. It depends on how much you put in and how much it's decomposed. That means that is how much is remaining in the soil, right? So if you keep doing a continuous cropping and remove all the biomass at one time, it will always decrease. So you need to have a practice that returns some of the organic matter in the soil. So this is good management, but it's not just happening about that. There's also innovative practice that people can create, that not just change the practice, but there's other innovative practices that we can increase. So we'll talk about it later. So what you're asking is that possible to reverse this trend? Is there any evidence that we can reverse this trend? So fortunately, yes, this is working with colleagues, Dr. Yi Sulaiman, Pak Yi from BBS DLP some time ago, a few years ago. So we collected data of soil carbon from different periods, because in Indonesia, there's soil analysis has been collected since during the Dutch period until current. So when this is in Java, this is historic soil topsoil carbon content. So, and the carbon stock from 0 to 20 centimeters. So when we plot it, we can see that the 1930s and 40s and 50s, this still is quite high, but over time there's been decreased because overuse of the carbon content. But over time, we can see that this has slowly increased again, right? So from the 70s up to 2010, there's also slowly increase again. So if we plot this based on, again, we scale it to the reference carbon content based on the soil type from 0 to 1, that means that this is under forest or natural condition. And over time, we can see that from the 1930s to 70s, if we use the soil quite heavily, you have a decrease in the carbon content, but over time from the 70s, 80s upwards, you can see that's a trend of an increase in the soil carbon content. So what causes the soil carbon content to increase? So we look at different conditions, different practices. So one of the main contributor is that this is related to yield increase. So if we look at the crop production in Java, in rice and corn, you can see over time it has increased because of the green revolution. So increase in the crop production means that there's also biomass returning in the soil. And also practices that probably better practices, better management practices that reverse this decline. That means that it is possible to reverse this trend of decline from a carbon content, which is decline, but it is possible to reverse this decline even in tropical agriculture through farming practices. This is again another data. This is from Pak Darmawan from IPB. This was his PhD thesis. So they were comparing, this is another similar evidence. They are comparing the topsoil carbon content in the island of Java. So there are sites that has been visited in 1970 by the professor from Japan, and in 2003, Pak Darmawan returned to the same site and collected the soil samples again. But we see that there's a within this period there's an increase in carbon content, which is all due to the effect of green revolution because of the increase in the crop production and better management techniques that return also increasing in the crop production. That means that you have an increase in biomass, above ground biomass and below ground biomass, which increase the carbon contribution to the soil. And if we look back again, if we compare the 2003 over the 1970, we can see that there are different types of farms. There's farms that do better management, and with the crop rotation, the increase is about 1.2 times from the original in the 1970. Okay, so there are practices that allow us to build up carbons. So for example, this is a study in Sulawesi. They're comparing the age of the plantation, the age of plantation. So this is in comparing in Sulawesi. This is agroforestry with cocoa, and this is just planting maize. If it's planting maize, that means that the crop, the return of organic matter in the soil is less. There's more harvesting and less of the input of the organic matter. So over time, you can see the carbon content over the reference content will decrease over time. But in terms of agroforestry, for example, cocoa, that's because of the different types of input of organic matter, just not just from the cocoa tree, but also from the other agroforestry that you can have a increase organic matter in the same. So it's a balance of how much you put in and how much can be retained. So there are practices that you can help increase carbon content in the soil to reverse the decline. So it's not just here that we can be satisfied, but if we keep doing innovation, different types of practices, innovation, and some of you, I believe, that who work in the field knows more about innovation in the tropics. You can reverse this decline in organic matter. So what are kind of management techniques? Different rice management. Well, I'll talk briefly, which you know better. For example, the not continuous flooding, the SRI type rice management. Composting of waste, composting of different materials, organic farming, agroforestry, and also mixed farming system, mixed farming system that can reverse this decline, right? So, but what we need to know is that, for example, in rice, there should be a balance of all greenhouse gas, right? So we can increase the soil organic carbon, but there's also other gas that that is being released. So this study is from South Korea. So it's not tropical soil, but it's a paddy rice. I think it illustrates that there should be some balance between carbon in the soil and organic matter and also greenhouse gas emission. So they're comparing 3 types of treatment. So one is no straw if they don't apply the straw of the rice. One is they spread the straw on the surface of the soil. And one is they mix the straw in the soil. So if they didn't, so this is flux going in the atmosphere. That means that you release gas in the atmosphere, you release methane, nitrous oxide, carbon in the soil, and this is the net green global warming potential. If we convert everything, the flux is to tons of CO2. So if you don't put any straw, that you don't put organic matter in the soil, that means that most of the organic matter will decompose in the soil. That means that your overall has a increase in global warming or greenhouse gas emission from your system, right? So if you have include the straw in this, if you put the straw in the system, and when you do flooding, because the anaerobic condition, anaerobic oxidation, the methane the production of methane will increase significantly, right? And because you put the straw, that means that you have an increase in soil organic carbon, but your methane production is increasing as well. So at the end, your net global warming potential or net greenhouse gas potential is similar to if you're not producing, if you're not including straw. Although you can store soil organic carbon, you can recover the soil organic carbon, but because you put lots of straw in and it's not well mixed, then your methane gas production will increase. But under condition where you mix the straw, that means that you can decrease the methane production. At the end, if you have an increase in the methane production, but then you have an increase in soil organic carbon, the carbon goes in the soil. That means that overall the net greenhouse gas
Bro,
production.
Minasti.
Yes.
I am about 5 minutes left. Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So overall, we can express it in terms of yield, tons of CO2 or over tons of rice yield. So if you don't put straw and if you just spread the straw, that means that your CO2 emission for producing a tons of rice is similar. But if your management is good, if you mix the straw in, that means that you can already half the CO2 production. So this is also the methane emission. So if there's a continuous flooding, if you add the straw, that means that this period, then you have a high methane production. But if intermittent drainage, that means that you don't flood always, that this is the period where you drain the soil, that means that your methane production will also reduce the if you don't flood, that means that your methane can reduce. So management of plant residue in rice is also important. It's not only important to increase the soil organic carbon, you can put back the straw, but if you keep flooding it, that means that there's lots of anaerobic decomposition, which you can increase the soil the methane production. So this is not, but for example, agroforestry. In agroforestry, that means that you're not only increasing soil carbon, the red is increasing soil carbon, but the emission of nitrous oxide is also minimal or also small. including cover crops, you also decrease the nitrous oxide. And also in some cases, organic amendment not only increase soil organic carbon, but also can decrease nitrous oxide. So all of this is not just, we have to take in consideration, not just increasing soil carbon, but also the other gas as well has to be reduced. So now the 5 minutes, I'll talk about volcanic soil in Indonesia. This is unique in Indonesia. In Indonesia, it's about 17% of the land area. And the carbon content in Indonesia is for this volcanic soil or andosol is very high. So 3 to 5% is common. Sometimes it's also 10%. And this is the study from West Sumatra, but we can see that in some, a lot of it is also depending on the types of carbon, right? So somebody in the chat asked about different types of carbon. So here we quantify the aromatic over the aliphatic types of carbon, the stable over the labile carbon. So a lot of the stable carbon exists when you have a lower, the proportion of stable over labile is higher in the lower carbon content. That means that at a lower carbon content, most of it is being stabilized, but at the higher carbon content is more labile. That means that it's not a bad thing, but it means that those carbon are more available for microbes to consume. And in Indonesia, this is last month in Sinabung, you always have this kind of event, volcano happening. So what's happened to all these ashes? These ashes is actually a source of not only for nutrient, but it also a source for sequestering carbon. So what do I mean? So for example, this is in Sinabung over time. So when this happens, this is few months after that, you can see that there's about few centimeters of ashes on top of the soil. So this is in 2014, everything is covered in ash, right? So this is after 3 years after that, this is in 2017. So in some areas, so people put this ash in a bag, in a karungkoni, in a bag, and then left it over there. So after 3 years, what do you see? You see that they're starting to have algae and some grasses. And if you measure the carbon content here, the carbon content is around 4%, right? So if the ash without rainfall or is covered, the carbon content is 0%. That means that over this short period of time, it has the capacity to grow plants and it has the capacity to store carbon. So this is an experiment done by Professor Dian Fiantis. So she took the ash or tephra, and then she put it on the pot experiment. So this is from 2006 and 2009. Over 4 years, you can see that if it's only tephra, if it's only ash, the organic carbon increase in the soil is minimal because there's a lack of microorganism. But if it's on top of the soil, from nearly 0 soil carbon content in 2006, after 4 years, you can see that the carbon content increased to 1.8%. So this, because ash initially doesn't have organic matter, but with over time, it can absorb carbon very quickly. And this is amount of, this is what we calculated. So every year in Indonesia, there's lots of volcano exploding. Last month is also only Sinabung. So this is last year. There's different volcano, Krakatau, Merapi, Gelut, and everything. So during normal years, there's about 200 megatons of millions of tons of volcanic materials. During a big explosion, like you can have 400 to 500 million tons of ash. So what do you do this? What do you do this with this ash? This is just a calculation. Don't worry about the number. What we say that if we use this ash as and we incorporate it in the farming soil, our farming soil. It's not only going to increase the nutrient, but the ash, because it doesn't have a carbon content, initial carbon content is 0, it can rapidly absorb CO2 and put it in the soil, right? And then during the decomposition, it's also the reaction of the mineral also take up CO2 in the soil. So finally, of course, all of this is not just scientists. So I'm a scientist here, but also we have to work with land managers to figure out which is best practices that are workable for the land manager. So if we tell them convert your farm into a forest, probably it doesn't work. So the farmers will not have anything to sell or anything to eat. But also the policymakers and also the market also govern this. And Dr. Coronaria Rumpel will talk more about 4 per 1,000 later. So as a summary, there's a large potential to restore the soil in the tropics because we have converted natural vegetation into cropland. So we lost at least 30% of soil carbon in the soil. So there's an opportunity to restore that. So we have to know that's about the reference point, about the reference state to evaluate the change. And with innovative management practice, it's still possible to put the soil carbon in the soil. But we're not just going to look at one carbon, but there's also nitrous oxide and methane. And there's opportunity in Indonesia because there's lots of volcanic ash should be used. So don't throw it away, don't wash it out, but encourage the farmers or encourage some practices to use it. Otherwise, it will be washed away in the river and ends up somewhere else. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Budiman Minasti, for very nice and valuable presentation dealing with organic matter. We realize that organic matter is principal component for soil. And therefore, a lot of response from the floor, Prof. Minasti. At least I read about 11 questions for you from chatting. A lot, quite interesting. But anyway, I will let some, not many. Yeah, we have 15 minutes for discussion. And I would like to invite Dr. Laura Sin of Bremen University to have a short answer, a short question. Yeah. And then secondly, I will like to invite Dr. Stiari, and the third is Dr. Isra Ismail. First, please, Dr. Laura Sin, for floor for your question, please. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just read and try to answer it.
Oh, just read and answer.
Or
okay, please.
If Dr. Laura is here.
Yeah, if Dr. Laura here then. Okay.
So she's asking about
Laura, please. Yeah. If it is not, then just hello.
Can you hear me fine?
Yes, please, yes. Laura. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
A short question, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I was wondering about the quality of the organic matter, and you already addressed that. Thank you for this. First, the quality of the organic matter that is lost upon cultivation, and if the organic matter that you restore when you do, for example, agroforestry or other practices, is it comparable chemically and also in the different functions that it can perform in the soil? Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, please. Okay. Let's. Pak Budiman, please.
Okay, thank you. So yes, obviously, the initial loss will be the more labile organic matter, but I think over time, if there's no input, I think also if there's no input eventually, and because the decrease in organic matter also will decrease the aggregation, some of the old carbon will get exposed into decomposition. So initially, I think as we showed that at the high level of carbon, there's a lot of labile carbon, which is fine, which is feeding the microbes, which feeds the microbes. But once those those labile carbon has been consumed, has been eaten, has been consumed. If there's no more increase, then the microbe will start looking for more food, and I think eventually the older carbon or the particulate organic matter will also will be lost. Right. So at the moment, I think there's not many study at a different mineral. I mean, there's lots of study of mineral associated organic matter in Europe and in the US, but I think in the tropics, there's in the humid tropics, there's still not many studies yet. And then, so the example of the straw. So why mixing the straw and why spreading the straw is different. So mixing, that means that you incorporate the soil with the straw, which means that it's not readily accessible to the metagenic bacteria to decompose. So that's why there's still decomposition, there's still anaerobic decomposition, but the rate is not as high as, that means that fully available, fully decomposition.
Okay. Yeah. Now I try to invite Dr. Astiari, please. Pak Astiari.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Budi Mulyanto. Thank you very much for your presentations, Professor Minasni. I just wonder, when we codify the agricultural land with the intensified agriculture system, it seems that the soil carbon stock will decrease. But at other time, we have to increase the soil productivity. Do you have a best solution to this trade-off? That's just my questions. Thank you very much for the answer.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think it's always it's a common problem, and it's unavoidable. So we cannot recover to the forest under forest condition. That means that even if we replant the forest, it will take some time to go back to the under the forest condition. So, and also we still have to increase the crop production. So what we are saying that is that we have to look at the way we manage the land. That means that how we have to keep thinking, because carbon is just how much you put in and how much it decomposes. That what is the best. So rather than burning the straw, for example, rather than harvesting the straw, okay, is it possible to return some of the straw, or else, or how do you incorporate animals production in the system or in the agroforest? Or if you're not talking about agroforestry, upland agroforestry, in the lowland, how do you incorporate in combination with other alternate cropping, or incorporate animals, so that there's a balance, not just so we're not just harvesting the biomass, but there's also a return of so, because we know we know all of this, there's many research already about the best management practice. So how can we, at a large scale, how can we best apply this at a large scale? I think that is going to help. Yeah.
Thank you. Then the third, I invite Pak Isra Ismail. Please, Pak Isra. Hello. Hello, Pak Isra. If it is not, then
hello.
Yes, please. Yes, please, Pak Isra. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Budi, and thank you, Professor Budiman. Sorry. Yeah, I have seen my question in chat that based on your crab and oil palm, would you explain how that soil carbon can be lost from the depth of 80 centimeters, if I'm not mistaken, from your crab? And the second, we have found that the research doing by a team from Brawijaya University So that in oil palm plantation, soil carbon will increase by increasing the age of oil palm, especially after 10 years old of oil palm. What is your idea about that? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Please, Udi.
Thank you. So that's not my result. This from another study. I think that one is a younger oil palm. So obviously, if under younger condition, and if you compare it with the forest, there will be a difference, because as I say, that it's unavoidable that if you convert from forest to either plantation or cropping, you will always lose a carbon. So I agree with you. Over time, the root biomass, for example, oil palm or other plantation tree, it will increase, and probably under plantation scenario, under oil palm or other plantation scenario, the loss of carbon is much less than compared with from the crop. I think there's already a study from World Agroforestry that show that under oil palm, if under best management, at the mature oil palm, the carbon content is not decreasing, or is sort of carbon neutral.
Yep. Thank you, Pak Budiman. Well, we don't have enough time for more discussion. I think we still left many questions, Pak Budiman, in the chat. I hope you can respond maybe later in the chat. And I would like to, I would like to stop this presentation, and thank you very much for the nice presentation and valuable presentation. And now I would like to come on the second speaker. But before the second speaker, I would like to make sure whether the third speaker around or not. Is Dr. Cornelia around in this meeting? Hello, Dr. Cornelia of French Center for Science Research. Hello. Yes. If it is not, then I continue for the second presenter, Dr. Jan Verhagen. Before presentation, I would like to read his short CV. Yeah, Jan Verhagen is a generalist in the field of soil science, agronomy, and ecology, and has experiences in providing practical solutions to complex issues requiring integration of knowledge on various fields. He worked on methodology development and designs of transition to sustainable agriculture production system. Also aim in tackling development and climate change. Jan has more than 2 years experiences in Europe, Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Jan represented the Netherlands at various national and international climate change related occasions. For Wageningen, he has co-lead several research programs related to food security and climate change. Jan currently leads the Wageningen Policy Support Program on food security for Ministry of Agriculture. Now, I will let you, Jan Verhagen, to present your presentation. 30-minute presentation and will be followed by discussion. Please, Jan, time is yours.
Okay, this is now the presentation. Then I have to go back. Let me see. What I will talk about is a bit of the high level end on the topic of soil management for adaptation and mitigation. As indicated before, I've been working on this for quite a while, but I've been more involved in policy advice at a high level. So move to the next slide, because that's because I don't have control over this page.
Yeah.
And because I sent the PowerPoint, I sent a video, and I think the video you can always place on the internet. So basically, a lot of this work is related to the SDGs. I hope you all understand the SDGs. And if you look at agriculture, it's about food and nutrition security, which is SDG 2. And that's the zero hunger goal. Sustainable production and consumption. I think we've already discussed this in the first thing for the production end. Consumption, we don't do a lot of work on, but we're moving more and more in that arena. Climate change is obviously a large challenge. That is the core of this work. But we should not forget to look at biodiversity, which I mean, recent reports also by IPBES have indicated that it's one of the major things, and agriculture has a large sort of responsibility there in terms of loss of biodiversity. So we also have to be part of the solution there. There are lots of other SDGs. I listed them down, but mostly all of the SDGs are somehow linked to agriculture, or the other way around, that SDGs like education is important for agriculture. So in the recent months, that's the next slide, we have this COVID-19, and that was also when I was in March in Indonesia. It was with a trade mission, and it was just when I came back from Indonesia, I landed in the Netherlands. I haven't been in the office because everything was on lockdown here. So, but what is clear from this COVID-19, that people are advocating a transition in food and how we treat our planet. So we have to go green. I tend to agree with that, but I'm not sure we're actually moving in that direction, because it's a choice. The same with mitigation, it's a choice. If you look at climate change, adaptation is something you have to do because you have to respond to what attacks you, and mitigation is a choice. And these choices are not easily made. One big movement we find in most policies over the globe, and that goes for industrialized and non-industrialized regions, is that poverty and the disparity between the rich and the poor becomes more important. So what we will do, even in a green transition, jobs and income will be important. And I'm sure that for Indonesia, the same will hold. Next slide, please. The other thing is that the signals related to CO2 emissions during the COVID, the left on top is the early April one, and then we see a large annual fall because of transport and air traffic going on lockdown, so no activities there. So we have a large fall in CO2 emissions. We've seen already that some areas like Australia and the US now, and even Brazil now, that due to fires, CO2 emissions are actually growing again. And we don't have a lot of time wasted after that we came out of lockdown in Europe, because we're almost back on track of the old emission profiles. So any long-term impact of this COVID-19 on emissions will depend on the greenness of the development or recovery packages. But that's a critical thing, because there's a lot of hope out there that things will change because of COVID-19, that it's a real big game change, but I'm not that optimistic. So this last message is from the early September. Next slide, please. I put this one in because it's a funny thing, because what a science has to offer, even if people are not interested in the topic you're working for, it is important that even in budget cuts and science not being taken seriously, we have a responsibility towards civil society, and some might even argue the planet, to keep on doing this, because you might get a phone call and that your expertise is needed. So we need to be ready on this, and that climate change is not going to go away because of COVID or any other sort of activity that we want to address in the long term. The same holds for biodiversity. Next slide, please. This is climate change in a nutshell. That also brings back the The title is Avoid the Unmanageable and Manage the Unavoidable. So the first one is about mitigation. You want to avoid thresholds that you move into a planet that you don't really understand and cannot work with. It's also then manage the unavoidable. There are things changing and you have to work with these. And again, in my mind, avoid the unmanageable is something that you actually, that's why the avoid is the first word there. That's we have a choice to do. Manage the unavoidable, that's not a choice. If your house is burning, you can either let it burn, but you have to manage it in a controlled way or start putting out the fire. So there's a difference in perception. A lot of the climate change activities has been related to the mitigation for a just reason, because if you avoid the unmanageable, your management of the unavoidable will become more easy. Next slide, please. And that also resulted in the Paris Agreement that was 2015. And this is the sort of, I hope you know the graph and you understand the Paris Agreement, which was part of the COP sequence of the UNFCCC. We agreed on the 1.5 and 2 degrees in Paris, which is 5 years ago. So now we should be producing plants and how we're doing it. So if you look at the time scale, it goes from 1990 up to 2100 at the x-axis, and the global greenhouse gas emissions, that's in fact your mitigation. You want to stay, in fact, in the green and yellow line. That these areas are what we have to aim for. And the more we postpone getting this trend, the dark line, the black line down, the more difficult it will become before we can hit the target of 2 degrees. It seems now that we are in the 3-degree range, which is pretty daunting because we're not sure what we're entering into. Next slide. And if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions by the sectors, we know that energy, like electricity and heat, is by far the largest one. But even agriculture and land use change and forestry are also important. So we are in the land use change and forestry and agriculture. They're normally combined, so then they become even larger, if you like. But and there are a lot of other things, but agriculture has a role to play. And agriculture itself, next slide, please, is about, if you rate it to food, 26% of the total emissions. That's a rough estimate. And that includes the supply chain, so the retail, the food processing, the transport related to this. Livestock is a big one. If you look at livestock and fisheries, it's 31%, but livestock itself is 30%. So livestock is a critical one, and that's something we all know. That's why we get the messages in the newspapers that we should eat less meat or be more conscious about how much meat we eat. Because eating meat in a lot of areas on the globe is not a bad thing, because it's protein that we need to survive. So we have to focus on livestock. That's mainly related to methane, obviously. Then the crop production, which is 27%. And that is mainly related to NO2 emissions, nitrous dioxide related to fertilizer application. And then the last one is land use change. That's conversion of land. That's 24%. That's a very important one if you look at land being cleared for agriculture, because that's why it's added to agriculture. There's also a large sector of the science that says we don't need to convert land to produce more food. Because if you look in terms of food security, we do have enough capacity to provide food for the population. It's a lot of distribution and economic processes that are not working in our favor here. And then it becomes the land sparing or land sharing part. Next slide, please. So if you go to adaptation, adaptation is not done in a vacuum. It's not only climate change that we have to deal with. We have to deal with other issues as well. We have common development programs. You have population growth. You have your needs for food, feed, fiber, and fuel. You can do it locally or within blocks. That's, I mean, the EU is working in a block. ASEAN is trying to work in a block. You have to provide jobs and income also for young people. There has to be an absorption capacity of your economy to provide people with jobs and income. And agriculture in a lot of countries is still an important provider of jobs and income. And then I mean agriculture in the sense, as I said earlier, that includes the retail, the transport, and the processing. So it's the agri-food complex. And then the other thing that we have to realize in adaptation is that there are positive and negative effects. So it's not all negative. It's not about conservation per se. So it's not keeping it as it is, because we have to move forward in agriculture, and technology has always been an important driver here. So that is something we have to realize. There even might be opportunities arising from changes in the climate. Could be beneficial, but you have to take the two into account. There will be uncertainty and risks involved. That's not that different in the sense that they're always there. So we have to be prepared for that. You have to factor that in. And a lot of people factor in risks, a short-term risk on insurance, for instance, and that sort of thing. There people are actually managing that already. So we have mechanisms to do that. Dealing with uncertainty is something that policymakers in general don't like, because that is something that they cannot manage. Extremes and variability in relation to climate change, which is obviously linked to the risk, not so much to the uncertainty, will also change. And that's, if you see that's where the resilience thinking comes in, and then the shocks that you might have from changes. And again, economic shocks we've had. We had a financial crisis, we had a monetary crisis, now we have a health crisis. So we call everything crisis now, but it's just extreme events. And we have to organize ourselves to deal with these things, also in agriculture. Variability is also part of this ball game. We know we have large variability even in a more or less stable climate zone, but we still have to manage it. We have bad years and good years. So, but we have to be able to do that. As we move along in agriculture, we tend to look more at the longer term. It's longer term planning, and longer term than being more than 10 years. So it's also longer term investments. And again, building a road for agriculture will also benefit other activities. So it's not limited to agriculture. So next slide, please. If you, in agriculture, what we see in Europe at least, is that we move into a sort of technology, innovative, knowledge-based system. So actually, in terms of jobs and income, we see that agriculture is moving away from labor resources and moving more to robotization through mechanization first and then robotization. We also know that we need to feed more people with less land, because we don't need all the land that is in agriculture now. There are other economic reasons why we use that land as well. And we need better food, so we need quality there. So in terms of adaptation, and we have the two angles. It's doing things different. So what we're doing it a bit different planting, different irrigation, water management, or doing different things, going away from the traditional agriculture and moving even offshore, trying to work with algae or seaweed even, or going indoors and using high-tech agriculture. There's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on where you are and where you want to go. So there is a planning, there's a development process there involved. What we do know that we need capacity and skills, and that's where science comes in, but also basic training of farmers. Just vocational training is then very important, because you have to work with farmers and people that have to do the work.
Yep.
So finance is obviously a big one. Information and knowledge. Information and knowledge is linked to data, big data discussion. and computer modeling, and technology. That's the robotization. We see more and more things being done by small robots, even in the field. So next slide, please. So this is where I put the technology and the skills and capacity. So if you move up in technology, if you want to use greenhouses or future farms which are integrated, you need to train people to do this, because it is not simple to do a good job. And what we see in agriculture is that when we move up in technology, we become more specialized and less integrated. So if you want to be high technological and highly integrated, you need different skills and capacities. I mean, most of people on this webinar are scientists, and they're all specialized. So they look at a very narrow thing, and they're still all food secure, and they can manage their job. But it's very difficult to integrate a larger farm. So that requires different thinking as you move up this technological and skills and capacity ladder. So that's the integration of these things. Next slide, please. So how we look at this in Wageningen, we're trying to integrate these things through the food system. And basically, for the food system, you have to define what do you want to deliver with the food system. I already mentioned jobs and income. If you want to relate to food security, it is the access to food, it's food availability, and that has different components. And the environmental outcomes, which might be important in a lot of decisions that we make in agriculture. It could relate to services and goods. It could be carbon, for instance. Carbon could be a service, but also biodiversity. And these are the larger sort of outcomes that we aim for. You have to be specific if you move back to the food system, to the left side of the graph, where you have the food system activities in blue, which is, I hope, not that new. It is basically the food supply system from production to consumption, and the environments and services that are included are directly linked to this food system activities. The other things are the drivers. Socioeconomic drivers are important. Markets are obviously important in agriculture, but also science and technology is important. And these all are interconnected. The same for the environmental drivers. Land and soil is at the right-hand side in the green bar down below. But also water and biodiversity is part of that. And they have two-way interaction, because they have a link in the direction land and soil it produces, but also agriculture has an impact on land and soil. So that is the concept in a way. And if you want to, next slide please. And if you want to apply that as we are trying to do, we have different concepts that already fill in a large of these gaps, a large system. So we have the farming systems approach. Underlying that, there could be actually soil science, if you like. And we have the value chain approach, which includes the off-farm activities up to consumption. And we already have a lot of instruments and tools to work with these systems. So we don't want to throw them away, we want to use them. Next slide. And climate smart agriculture, which has a strong focus on the environmental drivers, is defined in one study by a colleague in this domain. So it integrates the whole thing. So there's a lot of waste management and waste recycling. So there's circular agriculture in there, or circular food systems, if you like. It's just a way to show how things are connected and how you can work together on different topics. And we're also trying to apply this in climate change activities. That's ongoing work now. We're doing a study or a report for IFAD, and within our own knowledge base in Wageningen, we're trying to work out how this is best done. And there are different venues there. One of them is about crop breeding. to combat pests and diseases, or actually even nature-based solutions is part of this, how to use nature in managing your agricultural production and reducing pesticide inputs. It's about waste, recycling and reuse. How can we do that? What are the best things that we need to do? What are the transitions needed in the food system? So these sort of questions, that's still open, but we're doing that now in Vietnam, in the Delta and the Mekong, Bangladesh and East Africa. So unfortunately not in Indonesia. And we're hoping to get the first results next year, because this year has been a bit of a disaster when it comes to field work. Next slide, please. So how to make things work for adaptation. So I've been not going into the language of mitigation adaptation per se, because I don't see them as a different thing. It's a different thing from the climate change perspective. But if you look at the food system, you have to address them in terms of the outcome, so they're connected. What is important to realize if you work on climate change, it's not the only driver of change. If you focus on one thing, you might be off. Also, if you want to change things, because a lot of the work we're doing now is about transitions and how to actually shape these transitions. The other thing is that you need to focus on the needs and objectives of actors and stakeholders. We do a lot of work for the private sector, but also policymakers, and they have specific needs and objectives. They could be time bound. I mean, for policymakers, this is normally done. For the private sector, there's a different dynamics. That is something that you have to realize. If you want to have activities linked to it, you want to be focusing on who you're working with. And we need to be realistic about trade-offs and synergies, because it's very difficult to get a positive or a triple win, if you like. So, and there are consequences of choices. So it was clear, if you cut down forest and you do agriculture, you lose carbon, but that could be not a bad thing to do if you need to produce more food and you don't have enough land. So it could be a short-term answer to a question, but it could be a long-term disaster. So that is the other one. Medium and long-term possibilities and consequences, that is something you need to take into account. So don't get too hooked up on the short-term options that we have. So next slide, please. I'm nearing the end of my presentation for people that think of what's going on. But there's some soil in here, because soil is in the right corner, lower corner. It's always in the bottom soil. So that's where I think these designers put it. But it's not unimportant, because it links to a lot of other activities, especially agricultural production, obviously, but also to the other environmental drivers, water and biodiversity and minerals being the most obvious ones. Next slide. I just put this in because you can check out the links, because we did a lot of research on soil science in Europe over the last few years, and soil science has gone in the up, where years ago it was difficult for people to work on soil science. A lot of activity has gone into soil science, and one of the drivers is the carbon agenda. And that is a good thing and a bad thing in a way. I'll come back to that later. Next slide, please. So this is one of the bigger projects which started this year. That's EGP Soil. That's joint programming by several member states of the EU. And that starts from the targets at a high level: food security, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and ecosystem services. So there's three very, very large topics that sort of underpins this activity on soil science. So how we're going to do it is about developing knowledge, because it's a very strongly science-driven process here. So, and we're going to advise policies, we're going to harmonize methodologies, especially if you look at modeling and data. I think we do not collect enough data to actually understand what we're doing, and modeling is always a very difficult one, but it is important to actually have this long-term perspective. So we need to do this. But we also want to do field and experiments on long-term field experiments, actually. That is something where we want to focus on as well. And then we deliver a lot of things on guidelines and policy briefs and data, etc. What we're aiming for is the impact of EGP soil is understanding a lot of things. Again, carbon sequestration is a main driver. I myself personally am not the optimist where it concerns carbon sequestration, because measuring it is a nightmare. But I do understand the importance of soil organic matter in production and a lot of soil functions and services that provide it. So keeping carbon in the soil is always a good idea. It specifically holds true for peat soils. That's a big debate in the Netherlands now. And I know it's been a big debate and still is in Indonesia. And then at the end, after the impacts, we want to support farmers in their role as stewards of land and soil resources. And then farmers have to help to realize the SDGs. So the main problem I have with this thing is that the farmers and the land practitioners, they're at the end. They're not part of this, this ball game. They're the receiving end, and they didn't. So as I said earlier, you have to reflect on the needs of the stakeholders. That is not done in these science-driven projects. So we're trying to repair that in a way. Because we know, and that's the next slide, that the next slide please, the farmers are not really always responding in a way that scientists make sense for scientists. Basically soil scientists, it's we've been reading a lot, especially in relation to carbon, as that is part of the main topics here, the low-hanging fruit, and farmers are not doing it. So who is not picking the low-hanging fruit, and who is then the irresponsible or stupid person in this case? And farmers have all sorts of reasons, and even in Europe there's a large diversity in farmers and how they respond. We did a study in the Netherlands, and all the farmers, they understand that soil organic matter is important. So they try to increase the soil organic matter content in their fields. That's mainly on the mineral soil, so not on the peat soils. But farmers also realize that it's beyond their direct influence. They can try to do it, but there are all sorts of other things that hamper it. And they don't see that they can actually have a large impact there, because it also doesn't really show up in the measurements. If you do that every 5 years or so, you have to keep doing it for a long period. And even then things can go wrong, because risks and surprises will not go away, as we saw. The other thing is that there are very practical things that the Dutch Manure and Fertilizer Act and the costs of organic inputs are not always in favor of activities that increase soil organic matter content. Even the potato and the sugar beet that we use in agriculture in the Netherlands, which are profitable crops, they don't help in storing carbon, because it requires disturbing the soil, the topsoil. So there are all sorts of practical reasons why things don't go as they are planned. Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay. So where we want to work on land and soil in relation to agricultural production, we found that a lot of the issues to farmers' behavior relate to the individual factors of the farmer. Could be the age and the ambition of the farmer. So, but also policies and markets. So what they're locked into this system. So the science and technology doesn't really provide the main answers. No, that's the next slide, but that's fine. The same holds for soil quality and soil health. Oh. Okay, so the answers are somewhere else in the food system. So we have to go and connect the dots here. So that is how we use this framework. And it is simple as it looks, but it helps in communicating and targeting the right disciplines that you need to work into this transition. It also brings a bit of humility to the science and technology aspects, and that other things are more important. So sometimes you have to wait for others to move. One of the science and technologies that could be important here is even sort of communication science, or even historical science, what has been done over the last 100 years or 50 years, and why. Because the world has always been more dynamic than we try to think. Next slide, please. We also did work on soil quality and soil health. It was done by colleagues of mine, and also as a spin-off of an EU project. Because we all know to work on the soil services, which are production, nutrients, water purification, and carbon sequestration and biodiversity, which are sort of linking to the soil quality and soil health issues. But we measure the soil properties because that's easier. The soil properties can be pH, organic matter content, etc. But these are very highly variable in time and space, so they're not steady states in that sense, in that they change over time, especially in agriculture where you have managed soils. And even different climate zones will have a different effect on these soil properties. So moving to ways to measure the services themselves, which is for some it's easy, I think, or relatively easy. Carbon, it's still a nightmare, but that seems to be, and then carbon in the topsoil, that seems to be a lot of energy going into this. But for biodiversity, it's a difficult one. Water is spatially connected. We do model there a lot, so there are some activities that we can combine there. The other way to go is, and that's for the most activities has been going on in the nitrate work in Europe, is to promote practices with a proven effect on the services, and then a proven positive effect, obviously. And that is also locked into a specific management related to a crop and climate. So we have to be very precise there. So if you then look at what sort of systems and what sort of activities are required to set this up, that would be the next slide. Then science and technology become important, because there's a lot of science and technology needed on how to measure it and how to monitor it. And agricultural production is obviously at the core of this, because that's where the management takes place. And then the environmental drivers come into play. And that is a very strongly linked system. And that is where most of us are very comfortable in. So that's where a lot of soil science are moving into. This is my last slide. The next slide is the last slide. And that is, in fact, but for farmers, we have to realize that it is not only the soil they manage the soil also indirectly. Crop protection measures, they have an impact on your soil biodiversity. Even the crop variety has an impact. Rotation, and we know a lot about nutrient management and manure application and irrigation or water management in relation to production, but we then also have to look at the larger landscapes. And if the other, to the right hand side, we have a sort of a palette of all sorts of management options, technical options of what to do, and you can't probably read it, but that's also not important, just to show that the different options the farmer have to do this are manifold, and even the detail on doing it is also manifold. So even the management part is going to be very difficult to figure out, because also there the impact of the activity on the service will be daunting to extract. But that's something we're trying to do, and then that will come out. We want to do this with farmers and with experimentation. I'm not going to give a closing statement now, because I think there must be questions, and I'm not sure how I did by time, and I'm not even sure you could all hear me, but I hope you could. Thanks.
Anyway, yeah. Thank you very much, Jan Verhagen, for your very, very nice presentations. Not only nice, but you see, you provide high level of thinking related to how to respond the uncertain situation today. I think your highlight about avoid the unmanageable, manage the unaffordable is quite important. And you gave very great direction to where we answer the issue of like food and also climate change. Thank you very much. Anyway, now I try to open discussion for three question. Please, the floor if you like to present. First, I would like to invite Dr. Simarmata to alar Simarmata. Please express your question. Yeah. Hello. Hello, Pak Simarmata.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for giving me the opportunity. Climate change is real and hit Indonesia, and most of our agricultural soil, especially in along coastal area, has been degraded and categorized as acidic soil. So, would you please to share us your experience? How is the best practice to improve and to manage the soil organic matter in sustainable ways in adapting to climate change and what we call climate resilient agriculture? Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll answer directly. That's the idea.
Yes, please. Yeah.
That's thanks for the question. I think it's a valid one in the sense that it's an important topic. If you look at the coastal areas, you would have different issues there. In most coastal areas in Southeast Asia, the low-lying coastal areas, these are actually sort of not only the soil organic matter is an issue there, but then the water quality is an issue there. That's so you have to go into the whole system. If you want to increase the soil organic matter, if that is the best way to go, I think the crop rotation might be a good one. But a lot of paddy rice, it's very difficult to do a crop rotation. It requires a lot of work actually. So that there are always different answers for the different situation. So there's not one silver bullet. What I know from a lot of the lowlands in Southeast Asia is that soil management is directly linked to the water management. So if you have acid sulfate soils, you would do something else than if you have a peat soil. And if your peat soil is degrading, you might have a different strategy again. If you look at the dry lands in the coastal areas, and then I'm trying to figure out where you want. It could be the ridges, the beach ridges that you work on. Then it can be very difficult to actually increase soil organic matter. Because I think also in the previous presentation, there is a sort of, every soil has a sort of different natural optimal to work on. So if you want to increase soil organic matter, you have to bring soil organic matter or organic matter to the soil. And basically you can do that through nutrient management and manure and a certain tillage or avoiding tillage methods. So that is the most bestly proven strategy on your dry land. But it's enough to adapt to climate change that will strongly depend on what sort of climate change you're looking at. Even soil organic matter in mineral soils and trying to avoid or actually increase resilience might not always be possible. Because how much water can you store in a topsoil and how much time you would have to overcome a dry period? Then there could be a different strategy there needed. Even in Europe, we have the issue that if the dry periods become longer, increasing your soil organic matter will only give you a few days or a week maximum of more water in the soil. And after that, still the crop perishes. So you might want to go into more drought tolerant crops instead of trying to sort of keep what you have. So that is the thinking that you want to do in adaptation for climate change. So what are the opportunities? What does the system force you into, and how can you exploit that? And then the crop variety might be your best management option to deal with that. The same for salinity. You can actually fight it, putting more fresh water on there, or you can also say, okay, it's going to happen, and I have to change things. So I have to do different things, or I have to do things differently. It's a long answer, and I didn't really specify anything, but that's...
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. And the second question, I let Miss Nawati. Let's explain your question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the increasing population is an important one.
Yes. Yes, Miss Na, please.
Hello, yes.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. My question is, due to the increasing population and food demand, even climate change, soil exploitation will be more intensive. In your opinion, how we can deal with this problem if we really let this to SDGs goal?
Yep. Okay. Yes, please, Jan.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Increasing population is a big issue now. It is something that we actually can model quite well in a way. So there also will be a decrease at the end of the century. So that is the good thing. I won't be there to see this happen, but it's that's what the figures say. The other thing is that the increasing population is becoming more and more urbanized. So people move into larger city areas, which also has an imprint on the soils itself, because they do expand. But increasing food demand, increasing food production to fulfill demand, you can do in several ways. The most logical first step would be to reduce food waste. That's where a lot of effort is going into. So you would actually reduce your production by taking away part of the demand from reducing waste. So that is an important one. The other one is increasing production levels on a per hectare base. So, and that could have consequences for your soil exploitation. So having higher yields on the same area of land will mean actually more intensive agriculture in that part of the land. And that's the old dilemma of land sparing or land sharing. Do you want to have what some might call green deserts, specifically for agriculture with high production? Or do you want to have an agricultural green landscape with a lot of biodiversity in there? In Wageningen, the jury is not out on this yet, but a lot of the efforts that we do in Europe is about specialization and concentration of production. So do what you're good at and do that on a small plot of land and try to get as much out of this small plot of land. That is not per se the best way to work on jobs and income, if you like. So that if that is then you would have a different model. But that is how we actually work with it. Again, there's not one size fits all. For Java, for instance, North Java is rice is an important crop, obviously. It's mechanization that is important in rice production and the concentration, so also the scale. So you could have your food production of rice could be up, but it could be that in Laos, in Vietnam, they're doing a better job now, and you could actually buy it cheaper from them. In Vietnam, for instance, they're trying to diversify, move away from rice, and trying to go more into fruits and vegetables for markets, because they're linked. So that it's your competitive advantage, and how you work that out. If you go into the intensification, your soil will be suffering more than if you don't do it. But it might be the right choice to actually preserve biodiversity.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah.
And now the third question will be delivered by Lilis Setiawati. Do you still have? Yes, please, Mbak Lilis. please deliver your question.
Okay.
Hello. Yep.
My question is, what is the clear figure or trend of the effect of climate change to agriculture shift? Maybe let's say from the temperate region to the tropical region. Is it about the drier area or less rainfall? And then the effect of the plant growth, is it better or worse or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ibu Lilis. Okay. The shift in production and the effect of climate change. There are two things there. That's first, the impact of carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere has a positive effect on many crops, except for the C3 crops. But so there is a slight positive effect. The other effects that relate to temperature, some areas become too hot. So there could be an extreme event. It could be, if it is a few days, if even to flowering near 40 degrees, a lot of crops will suffer. So there is a timing there, and that's very difficult to estimate, but that could be the extreme event that you have. The other one is the water. We see in a lot of areas, we see heavy rainfall, so flooding then becomes more pronounced. And that if that happens during the growing season, you can destroy a whole harvest. So these effects, you can manage these to a certain extent. But they're all spatial, so it's very difficult. It depends on where you are, obviously. Soil productivity in terms of if you have a soil and you have it in the tropics and you grow a crop, it will be temperature that will drive the processes. Some processes will go faster. So also the maturation. So if you have flowering up to ripening, you might have a shorter period, and a shorter period of grain filling, for instance, for a lot of cereals means to have a lower yield. So the whole process speeds up. So you might have a negative effect there, but you can do breeding on this, and you can actually adjust your timing of your production system. So there are ways of dealing with it. So the soil productivity is the soil is important in production, but it is, in my mind, the crop choice and the management are overruling a lot of these things. So, but the trend is look at the temperatures, because it will also affect your soil services, especially carbon again. Look at water, that's an obvious important one. Some people are trying to look at changes in biomass in soil, so the types of biomass that you have in the soil, how do you call it, microbial activity, that might change with higher temperatures. And that has a strong impact on your soil functioning. So that would be the way to go. I'm not sure there are studies done on CO2 concentrations, how that would affect the soil itself. That could be the other one. So,
yep.
Thank you, Jan. Figure or trend? No, thank you.
Now, the last question, I let Laura Ni of Bremen, if you like to present. Laura, please. Hello, Laura. Yeah, you again.
Hello.
Yeah,
thank you. I was interested if, from your experience as a policy advisor, you can share with us if you feel that there's, or how much common ground there is concerning future soil management and also the food system of the future, because you showed so many very complex and also compartmentalized graphs that I wonder how far is there a consensus and a vision.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Short answer, there is no consensus, obviously, but there is The food system is something that is used in communication. That's what I think I hoped I explained a bit. It links things together and it places activities in a structured way. In that food system, you can do very detailed research. So the food system helps in communicating. It also helps in understanding why soils are important, even though they're at the right bottom. Policymakers don't understand soil management. So getting that is into the mind. They understand the importance of the soil because everybody is echoing it. Then the science has to be very, very realistic on what we can deliver on soil management. Again, I am not the largest optimist where it comes to carbon sequestration, but I do understand the importance of carbon sequestration. So having soil management that will actually store your carbon or not emit your carbon is a very important step. And the main consensus is there then that peat soils you should not manage for agriculture because it does not help anyway. It doesn't help agriculture in many cases, and it doesn't help mitigation of climate change. On the mineral soils, it depends. It's then soil quality, it's fit for purpose, but then you have to find the purpose and how you want to use your land. And that is where in Europe we had with the soil strategy, because for some areas it's soil erosion that's more important, so they want to focus on this. Areas it's more on productivity in agricultural sense. So the purpose will define the common vision. So that at that level you can do that. The main distinction is between the peat soils and the mineral soils. I think that is an important one. And then in coastal areas, it is not per se the soil, but the water quality, that the saline intrusion in relation to climate change, that is a big issue. The solutions, some are trying to fight it, others are trying to move along with the change. And what the best strategy is, it's only for time to show.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Jan, for the response. I think that's all the question. You answered quite well. Then provide a lot of knowledge for us. Then because of time, I think I would like to stop this session. And thank you. And applause for Jan Verhagen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good morning to you, Dr. Cornelia Rumpel. We are pleased that you are joining us. This is the continuation of session 2. This presentation will be given by Dr. Cornelia Rumpel from France. She is a research scientist working for the French National Research Center at the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Sciences in Paris. She is the chair of the Scientific and Technical Committee of the 4 per 1000. Her field of expertise are on capacity development, food security and nutrition, land tenure and soil, human health, biodiversity and natural resources, climate change, agricultural development, network development and management, strategic planning, and project development. Dr. Rumpel leads the group at the Verbal Kringnon, which is concerned with the investigation of quantity, origin, turnover, and function of soil organic matter by the use of biochemical tools. During her 20 years lasting career, she studied the origin and fate of terrestrial organic matter, aiming to understand the mechanism controlling carbon sequestration in the soil. Her studies concern with various spatial and temporal scales in different environments, ranging from soils and sediment in mining areas to natural as well as managed ecosystem, including those affected by fire. Her work was carried out in temperate and tropical climates, and the result of her research changed a number of paradigms. In the last few years, her interest is focused on the development of fertilization strategies and agricultural techniques to reduce greenhouse gases emission and to foster carbon sequestration in the soil. The title of Dr. Rumpel's presentation is the role of the 4 per 1,000 initiative in the transition to sustainable agriculture. Dr. Rumpel, please.
For the introduction. Yes, I'm pleased to give this presentation at this very important first international conference. And so I will be talking today, as you said already, about the role of the 4 per nil initiative in the transition to sustainable agriculture. And I will do this also on behalf of the Scientific and Technical Committee, the STC of the 4 per nil initiative. These are 14 scientists. 14 scientists from all over the world, as you can see here on the map. Next slide, please. As you all know, our soils are under pressure because we have this population growth. The population, global population will grow to reach 10 million people in 2050. And most of this increase will occur in the developing countries. Next, please. And so over 1 billion of this increase alone will occur in Africa, and this will lead to increasing per capita consumption, and this points to the limits of land, because we have only this one Earth, and so we are all what we are producing is produced on the land area that we have on Earth. And so a lot of pressure is put on the soils, because we, excuse me, this was, yeah, because we have 12 billion hectares of productive land, and which ensure over 99% of the human food in terms of calories. So we get a lot of calories from the soil, but not so much from the ocean, for example. And one of our problems is that the soil is really heavily used, and much of the soil is already degraded, about half of all this soil after the FAO. Please, next, please. We also have to consider the socio-economic context in a changing world. Nowadays, the world is in transition, because we have a lot of changes, and hopefully this transition will lead to more sustainable world. So we have the agroecological transition, we have the digital transition, we have energy transition, and there are many more. And so we need to rethink our system. And we need, in particular, we need to rethink the way we do research, the way we do education, and also much of our production, for example, the agricultural production, and also the energy generation, we have to rethink. Next, please. So we have to think of a new kind of collaboration, because we have now, because of the globalization and things, we have really to work together. And this collaboration needs to be multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and need to include multi-stakeholders. Please. Next, please. So soil organic matter can be seen in this context as a cross-cutting issue to the many global challenges that we have. We have the food security challenge, the climate change challenge. We have a lot of desertification and also biodiversity challenge that we have to tackle. And so these are the United Nations major conventions that address also some of the sustainable development goals. And so when we see the soil and the soil organic matter in the soil, then we can see this as a link to all these pressing challenges. Next, please. So in 2015, there was the launch of the 4 per mil initiative focusing on the soil organic matter. And the 4 per mil initiative is in fact a platform for multi-stakeholder collaboration. Next slide, please. So the 4 per mil initiative was launched following a proposal made by the French authorities ahead of the COP21. Now 5 years ago, it was in particular the French agricultural minister, Stéphane Le Foll, who proposed that we need actions to increase the soil carbon, and in particular, we have to increase the soil carbon input. So, one of the actions was proposed that we need permanent soil cover. But this is empirical knowledge and not really based on process understanding. Next, please. And therefore, in this initiative, what we would like, to get knowledge on the baseline of sequestration rates or losses of soil carbon and current soil organic carbon stocks. We need the definition and co-construction of agronomic strategies and practices at various scales, and we need metrics and methods for the monitoring, reporting, and verification of soil carbon sequestration is possible on the basis of net accounting. Next slide, please. So the 4 per mil initiative is organized to facilitate the interaction between policy, science, and practitioners globally. We have the Forum of Partners. There are 359 organizations and 42 countries. We have the consortium of members with the president and the vice president, the executive secretary, and the scientific and technical committee. The scientific and technical committee gives advice and has a central role in setting the scene for the implementation of sustainable soil organic carbon sequestration strategies. And the 4 per mil initiative, we need once a year all of the consortium and the forum members at the 4 per mil day, and generally it is held at the climate conference, the COP of the UNFCCC. Next slide, please. So the objectives of my talk are to present the initial ambition of the initiative and how it corresponds to the scientific reality, to show how science policy practice interaction shaped the initiative, and to identify collaboration needs at the science policy practice interface to further advance towards the goals of the initiative. Next slide, please. So the 4 per mil initiative can be seen as similar as the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals as aspirational goals by the national government. So the United Nations defined these goals, the SDG. The national government suggested solutions. So one of the solutions may be increasing soil carbon storage, because soil carbon storage is a negative emission technology in view of climate change mitigation. So if we can store only 4 per mil of the current carbon stock, if we can add this carbon to the soil each year globally, then we would make a really substantial contribution to the climate change mitigation. So this is one important issue. And the other important issue is that soil organic matter actually increases soil quality. When you have a lot of organic matter in your soil will be more fertile and can hold more water. The plants can grow better. And so increasing soil organic matter may be one option to enhance the sustainable intensification of agricultural production. So these two goals, as in particularly the first one, had strong political appeal because nowadays everybody knows, everybody is aware that we have to do something about the increasing CO2 concentrations and that we need these negative emission technologies. And so the politicians were very happy about this, and it was also a politician that proposed this action. But however, the scientific community, there was a really controversial discussion about the feasibility of this initiative. Next slide, please. So the initial political framework was based just on a thought experiment that the global annual global CO2 emissions from fossil fuels divided by the total carbon stocks down to 2 meters in soil would give the number 4 per mil. So the 4 per mil, which would be needed to counterbalance the global carbon emissions, is really one number, easy to communicate, and is similar to the political goal of limiting global warming to 2 degrees centigrade, which is also not really, maybe not feasible. So the initiative gained importance due to this political interest, and this was wrongly understood as a target, a goal, and a strong commitment. And the initial criticism of the initiative was not related to the fact that we have to put more carbon in the soil, where everybody agrees on, but to the suggestion that this could offset all of the fossil fuel emissions. Next slide, please. So the criticism of the initiative was related to biophysical components, socio-economical and political criticism, in particular the non-permanence and the limited carbon storage capacity of the soils. And also there was the issue that there might not be enough biomass or nutrients available to store the carbon. And this criticism was mainly related to the number and the mitigation function of soil organic carbon sequestration, but not on the actual fact that we have to put more carbon in the soil. There was socio-economical criticisms that farmers will not adopt the practices. So we have to demonstrate benefits and to develop the policies to enhance adoption. And there was also political criticism that this will be used for an excuse not to change the lifestyle, and that soil science may be faced with a credibility issue. But we can only say that we need every contribution to fight climate change in order to make the change. So how to move forward? Next slide, please. So we need, there is a general consensus that this increasing soil carbon is beneficial due to its co-benefits, but we have also to realize that in terms of climate change mitigation, the achievable potential is limited to about 1 gigaton of carbon per year. But this we cannot account for all of the fossil CO2 emissions, but soil organic carbon can make a substantial contribution, which is equivalent to the emission from one big emitter, for example, of the European Union. And so we need a new definition of the 4 per mil goals. Next. So we have to realize that 4 per mil is really an aspirational goal and not a normative one. Next, please. It is achievable locally, but not everywhere. There are costs associated to the carbon sequestration in terms of nitrogen, phosphor, water, and biomass. There are risks associated, so we have to consider the greenhouse gas balance and also land use. And the main of our aims is to maintain and to increase the carbon stocks. So the concept, this concept is much more important than the number. And the number of 4 per mil is the order of magnitude for reference and may be achievable at local scale. So yeah, we have to acknowledge that soil organic carbon sequestration has its limitation. However, there are many possibilities for improving nutrient and organic residue management at farm, regional and national scales, which should be exploited to maintain and, if possible, increase soil organic carbon stocks and to improve soil quality. So we need a diversified strategy, and we have to consider the trade-offs such as greenhouse gas emissions other than CO2 and water use, and this should be considered and accounted for. Next, please. You click once more, please. Can you call once more, please? So, in order to implement the initiative, we facilitate the initiative, to implement the soil organic carbon sequestration. The initiative facilitates communication and interaction of multiple stakeholders. We have, for example, a collaborative platform, and we organize regional meetings. We had in Africa, Asia, and South America. We facilitate the communication and promotion of the necessity to increase soil organic carbon as a win-win strategy. And we established guidelines for success. So the STC in particular helped to define the rules of the game. We developed criteria and indicators to evaluate soil organic sequestration projects. And we want to mainstream these criteria in existing assessment schemes. So once a year there is a call for projects. These projects will be assessed by the STC, and there will be a prize for the most promising one. And we would like to promote excellent 4 per mil projects and success stories. Okay, so project assessment. What should be assessed? Projects are specific actions under defined temporal and spatial scales and ecosystems. They should be targeting retention or increase in soil carbon, and they should be related to land management and or land use options. And the projects should also have benefits, and trade-offs for local community should be considered. So why do we have to assess? We have to assess if the project is consistent with the aims of the initiative, and how the assessment takes place. The assessment is an ex-ante advice for the amelioration of sequestration projects using reference criteria and indicators developed by the STC. It should be assessed during the implementation, and it's important to notice that it's not a validation or certification process. It's really the STC gives advice for the amelioration of the project in view of the 4 per mil goals, and the project assessment is largely based on self-assessment. Okay. The depth and the quality of the advice given will depend on the quality of the information that is provided about the project, and the comments shall address the merit, the relevance of the proposals, the outcomes and expected impacts of the project. We also evaluate proposed methods and proposed analysis to quantify them. And now we are at the point that the project assessment procedure has been tested and validated, and we are about to contact certification organizations in order to mainstream our criteria and indicators. Next. So now I would like to tell you about a bit more about the assessment framework. So we have safeguard criteria in terms of human rights and land tenure, and we have direct targets and indirect targets which are related to the sustainable development goals. Next, please. So we have the first step of the project assessment concerns the assessment of the safeguard criteria, which should not, the project should not compromise those, should not compromise human rights, land rights, or poverty alleviation. The second step is the evaluation of the direct reference criteria. So, for example, the project needs to increase or have a positive impact on the soil carbon stocks and land degradation neutrality. A positive impact also on climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, and food security and/or food security. So then the soil organic, the project has to have a positive impact on soil carbon and should not compromise the others. And then there's a step of the indirect reference criteria, which are related to the impact of the project on welfare and well-being, and on biodiversity and ecosystem services, as well as water and nutrient cycles. We have the first step is the cross-cutting criteria. We look at if the project has positive impact on the training and capacity building, and if it's participatory approaches and so socially inclusive. And so as an outcome, we give narrative advice aiming at improving the quality of the project before and during the implementation. But, so this is about the project assessment, and then there are actions to improve the science policy interactions of the initiative. In 2017 at COP23 of the UNFCCC, there was a landmark decision which acknowledges the importance of agriculture and food security in the climate change agenda. This was really the first time that this was mentioned, that the UNFCCC recognizes the role of agriculture in tackling climate change. Before, this has never been an issue because there is this food security issue, and the people said, yeah, we cannot do anything about it. But nowadays, really the countries agreed to work together to make sure that agriculture development ensures both increased food security in the face of climate change and also the reduction of the emissions. And the countries launched the Coronivia work on agriculture, which is carried out, has been carried out in the last few years. So it's a joint, at these workshops, these issues are discussed, the issues of agriculture and climate change. And the 4 per Mil initiative made joint submissions with other UN bodies and FAO, and to highlight the role of soil seas, so that this is taken into consideration in this political process. And we made also consultation to enhance the naturally determined contribution ambition for soil organic matter protection and sequestration. Next, please. So we also defined research priorities. We developed a research program with the aims to estimate the soil organic carbon storage potential, to develop the management practices, to define the enabling environment, and also, most importantly, to go further, make further progress on the monitoring, reporting, and verification in relation to soil organic carbon. And this work was carried out in synergy with the CIRCASA project. And the objectives are to strengthen the international research community on agricultural soil carbon sequestration, to provide an improved understanding of agricultural soil organic carbon and its importance for climate change mitigation and adaptation, and for demands of increased production. The third objective was synthesizing stakeholder views and knowledge needs on agricultural soil organic carbon sequestration and climate change. And the first objective to further a more structured approach by preparing an international research consortium. Next, please. Next, please. So, and how can future progress be made in terms of soil carbon sequestration under the 4 per mil scheme? So, first of all, we need to stop soil organic matter losses. We have to apply known sustainable practices in order to maintain and to increase the soil organic carbon storage. We have to develop new practices and technologies. The practices that are applied should be monitored, the carbon storage reported and also verified. We have to test new strategies to raise awareness about the importance of soil organic carbon. We have to provide support, financial support, and also technical support. And we have to coordinate policies. And how can these 8 points be implemented? We have to, really we need to work all together, the governments, the landowners, the business, and the research, in order to apply, to implement improved soil management. Next slide, please. So the 4 per mil initiative developed a strategic plan. So we have a vision for 2050. We would like to have worldwide healthy and carbon-rich soils to combat climate change and end hunger. And our mission for 2030 is to provide a supportive framework and an action plan to conceptualize, implement, promote, and follow up actions on soil health and soil carbon through enhanced collaboration between stakeholders of agriculture, food, forestry, and other land uses in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we established a 4 per mil collaborative platform. I put you the web link, and I would like to ask you to join the initiative. So next, please. In conclusion, the scientists nowadays, with all the problems and grand challenges we have, need to step out of the laboratory and to engage with society and to provide the basis that political decisions are based on the best available scientific advice. The 4 per mil initiative is a place for this because it's a platform for multi-stakeholder collaboration. And to develop further, the initiative needs to engage with businesses, governments, private organizations, and to exploit funding possibilities. In order to be successful, political initiatives have to involve really multiple partners, and they need to be inclusive. And good communication between the actors is crucial here. Next slide, please. However, we need to really have in mind that natural climate solutions are not enough. We really need to dramatically increase efforts concerning the CO2 emission reduction across all sectors. And we need to be inclusive. We need to empower women, youth, and the global south. Next, please. Yes, I would like to thank Paul Lu and the Executive Secretariat, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Paul, I see one question, maybe one or two questions. Can you see in the screen? The first question is from Ms. Lilis Setiawati. Would you like to explain this question, Ms. Lilis? Or you can capture it from the screen now.
How close the direct relation effect of sea capture from air or sea sequestration by engineered physical chemical to soil organic carbon? How close the direct? How close is the direct relation?
Is there any relation between carbon capture for global warming purpose and soil organic content? I mean, is there how close the relationship?
There is sure a relationship. When you put the organic matter in the soil, then it's not emitted into the atmosphere. So there is a direct relationship with the global warming. But in order to make a real impact, this carbon storage need to be carried out at scale. So it's really globally and worldwide. And so there is where the problem is, because the upscaling is difficult, because the soil organic carbon content of the soils cannot be changed at scale very easily, because you need really a drastic change of the practices of all the farmers, and maybe some farmers already have good practices, and so it's very difficult to implement this at scale. But there's a direct relationship, and this was evaluated. The potential, the technical potential that we can achieve is about, as I said, 1 gigaton of carbon. So the direct relationship with the other parameters, soil fertility and soil activity, it's also there is a relationship, close relation. Normally, even the farmers all know that black soils containing high amounts of carbon, that they are more fertile. But quantification of this relationship is more difficult, especially for different soil types and things. But there is a rather close relationship.
Thank you very much. There is another question from the audience. How is the progress of the 4 per mill going on? Is there any consensus among countries to implement this project? This is from Mr. Setiari Marwanto.
There is a lot of countries joined the initiative, but and there is some consensus. But as with every political process, it's more difficult, because you need to have funds, and you need to convince people, and so we are working on this. The initiative is also still rather young. It's 5 years now, and I can only say we are working this, and there has some consensus achieved. But afterwards, when countries, they want to have some production, to have they're not looking. They are not really aware of the importance of the soil for the health and the well-being of the people, and so we have to more lobby and more convince them that this is really important. But I think in particular now with this COVID crisis, I think people get more aware of these issues, because they suddenly they saw that it's really important to have something to eat, and to have good and healthy food in order to stay healthy. And so it may now we may have more chance to make our claim.
Okay, thank you. There is another question from Dr. Budi Mulyanto, asking how rational is it to include the land ownership in managing soil organic carbon?
Land ownership is a boundary condition. Also we should not, land ownership should be respected. This is our issue, and I think respecting land ownership is important, and it's rational, as it's logical to be included. To be included in the evaluation of projects.
Okay, I would like to also pose one question for you as a follow-up question. If you make the prioritization in the 4 per meal initiative, how do you prioritize it? Whether you go to the very degraded soils like the mine areas or how? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hotspots of soil carbon sequestration would be judicious to identify, because we are limited resources and we will not be able to concentrate on all of the issues. We are working in close collaboration with this CECASA project, where they are more science orientated, and they use some modeling approaches where you can, for example, assess where there is hotspots of degraded soils or hotspots of food security issues, and you can look how is the organic matter status of in these regions, and how is the land use in these regions, and something. But you're right, we will probably not, even if in rich countries we can maybe tackle all of the soils at a global basis. Probably it's important to focalize on these hotspots where we really can improve carbon sequestration much stronger than in other places.
Thank you very much. I don't see more questions. Would you like to give one concluding message, a take-home message to the audience?
Yeah, really, we should, probably you already all know, because we are in the sustainable tropical land management. I think especially in the tropics also, soil organic matter is very important for the soils, to give them structure and also fertility. And in order to help our initiative and introduce, in order to that the soil management become more sustainable, I would like to invite you to join our initiative and to spread our message.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Cornelia Rumpel. So we have learned from you that enhancing soil organic carbon is not important only for the carbon itself, but also important for the soil health, the productivity, and the improvement of the humanity. And we thank you for this nice presentation, and have a good day for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Budiman, Dr. Jan Verhagen, and Dr. Rumpel for the presentation. And thank you also Professor Budi Mulyanto for moderating the session, and also Professor Fahmuddin Agus. Ladies and gentlemen, praise to God that we have now finished today's agenda. Tomorrow is the day 2 of the conference. It is our pleasure to invite you to participate in attending the program. The plenary session tomorrow will be start at 8 a.m. Jakarta time. On behalf of the committee, I would like to express my utmost gratitude to all of you for making today's agenda success. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for today. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye-bye.